The topic is the evolution of affirmative action, and we're talking to Ms. Walker and Dr. Sanford. Dr. Sanford, let's have you over the last few minutes that we have during this final segment to talk about where you see affirmative action in terms of American society today.
Well, thanks so much for that very important question. We are certainly at a crossroads with affirmative action. However, without any argument, there is still a strong need for this policy. We are at when I say this crossroads, I mean that when you think in terms of how people are moving into placing people in very uncomfortable, hostile environments because of their misconceived notions about affirmative action to the point of a backlash. Many are talking in terms of there being reverse discrimination. Dr. Alan Johnson, in his book entitled Privilege, Power, and Difference, talks about if there's one particular position, 500 people trying to apply for it who are indeed qualified for it, and if there's one European American person that gets that position, say in a high-tech type of a situation, then everybody feels like, well, it's a qualified person, then it must be okay. But if an African American or a female gets that position, then you got 499 people feeling that they are reversed to discriminate against. And I think when we move on, we'll see how affirmative action is indeed a process that leads us into having a better working environment. The American Association of Higher Education, the American Council of Education, looks at this process as actually benefiting the majority group in much more of a powerful way than even the minority group at institutions of higher learning as well as in the workforce. As you know, in 2003, the Supreme Court had to make a decision, as did with Brown, as did with Presley, as did with the Dred Scott case, about affirmative action. And we were with a slim margin of having support for it. So there is still a need for it. This whole notion of a compassionate, conservative type of society is not bridging the gap between the racist, discriminatory, and sexist type and homophobic type of environment in which we still live in today. So there is still needed there to try to give people certain types of opportunities and fairness.
Very good. You know, Ms. Walker, I think you mentioned earlier about the distinction between diversity and affirmative action. Let's have you to speak to that.
Right. Affirmative action is actually the process to get to equal employment and diversity. A lot of people want to talk about diversity, but they shun affirmative action. Well, you can't get to diversity without having affirmative action, this fair and open process that brings in qualified people. You just don't get there because people tend to do the same thing that they've always done. So if you don't have a program that requires people to do extensive outreach, to advertise in the right places, to have a fair job description, to bring people in and not to have harassment and discrimination in the workplace, then you can't have diversity. All you have is a revolving door. People coming in and people going out and filing cases of discrimination because they're not treated well in the work environment. So we have to understand that even with affirmative action, we don't get the kind of diversity that we should be getting at this time because people are still dealing with nepotism, bringing people, friends, families. I speak about the extensive form of nepotism and also putting people in place because it looks good to the community. That is putting African Americans or Native Americans or whoever in place who are not qualified. I think the most egregious act that can be performed is to place anybody in a position for which they're not qualified. But historically, in nepotism, you'd place Uncle Joe's son in the company, and then there would be support for that person so that they would be trained to move up the ladder.
They could grow in this situation.
But you put an African-American youngster in the mailroom, guess what? He stayed in the mailroom. He didn't get somebody to coach and to mentor. If you ask anyone in the higher echelons, you will find that they were mentored. And the fact is that many of the protected groups, African Americans, Hispanics, women, do not get mentored. They do not get supported. In fact, what you find, if you get a person who's well qualified and very knowledgeable and very capable of doing the job, they become a threat. And they're seen as arrogant, or they're seen as being too aggressive. Persons of color always have to walk this real fine line. You know, are you too passive? Are you too aggressive? But if you're doing your job and you're doing it well, you can become a threat to those in power. And I might say that this whole issue about equal employment is not only about race and gender, it's about power. And we talk about a glass ceiling. African Americans and Hispanics and Native Americans feel that they have a concrete ceiling that we can't get through.
They can't even see through it.
So we're trying to get people into positions where they can make policy, because we find out if we get people of color in positions where they are able to make policy, the other groups get very upset, get very threatened, and they want that person out of place.
Well, it seems to me over the last 3 minutes that we have here, it seems to me that both of you are saying that affirmative action is good for America. Is that,
Absolutely.
Let's have you speak to, both of you speak to that.
Yes, well, I think it certainly is very good for America, because as we look at that historical backdrop, we haven't gotten any place close to fairness. Anyone that talks about we have arrived and there's this whole idea of reverse discrimination, you show me the location and let me see how many managers there are, how many CEOs, how many people there in the workforce, and if it's reversed from how it has always been, meaning flip-flop, then I would say, well, yeah, we've arrived. But to this point, we haven't. And as far as policy is concerned, what you are hearing in common language is indeed the use of quotas, set-aside preferences, those types of things. And you're finding young students at majority universities are using that language without understanding what we have shared today. So it's needed.
Very good. And
I think that that is very crucial, that somehow our young people are being made to feel that affirmative action is a blemish on them. And it's not. It's the process by which they can get into the workplace and not be harassed and not be discriminated. So it's very important. And you find people asking. I had a young person during my Christmas holidays who told me that she was told to write a paper on affirmative action without looking up anything about affirmative action. So how can you write about something if you don't know what the definition is? And you'll be surprised at how many things we deal with that we never define. And it allows those who don't want it to give
their
impressions
definition of it.
And we fall for it. So we have to teach our young people what these processes are and that they are beneficial for everyone. If we're not exposed to each other, we don't get to know each other. I think there's a solution, and there's a big affirmative action program that needs to start from kindergarten to higher education, so that we get to learn about the contributions of all people to the United States of America. That is not being taught. Therefore, there are some groups that are stereotyped, and we think that they are lesser than. But we're all contributed to this great United States of America. I'm proud to be an American, but I'm not proud of the fact that our educational system has not provided to our young people the context in which they live, the truth about how the United States was formed and how we came to contribute and to be proud of those contributions.
Very good. 30 seconds, and before we end the show today, any final statements, Dr.?
Yeah, absolutely. I concur with Ms. Walker 100%. This is a need that we still need to continue to work on. It is through education and dialogue that we can reach some type of common ground. But we have to have true education, talking about the issues, not putting them under the rug and trying to placate it. We have to get them out there and talk about them.
Very good. Let me thank you, Dr. Sanford, and you, Ms. Walker, for coming by and giving us that excellent information about affirmative action. I think that even some of the things that we've said will indicate that not only is there a need, but it would be certainly to the benefit of the country. And I thank you for that information. And let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning.